Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Larry. Today I'm going to be editing this picture right here with you. As a beginner's guide, I'm going to take you through how I shot this image. So this image was actually shot with just 2 speed lights. So I had one speed light gelled red right behind the model. So I just had a black background, then put a red gel on the speed lights, put this behind the model to create this red effect that I have here. And the second light then was also a second speed light, which was the main light, which I mounted into a 32-inch softbox, which is coming from the left side of the model. So this is what is creating this main lighting that you are seeing here. To get straight into the retouching, I'm going to undo all that I've done here, and I'm going to use frequency separation. So I'm going to create 2 layers with a frequency separation method by pressing Ctrl, selecting the background, and pressing Ctrl or Command J twice on your keyboard. So I'm going to name this layer color, and I'm going to name the upper layer texture. So what would happen is that this layer here will contain the color information, and the one on top will contain the color information, the texture information. So to begin with, I'll turn off the texture layer, select the color, go to filter, then select blur and Gaussian blur. So here I typically like to work with smaller radiuses, because what a lot of people typically do, which is not also wrong, is that they like to work with a bigger radius where they don't see the skin blemishes. But because I'm going to use a mixer brush tool, I like to just work with a small radius where I still see the blemishes on the model skin. So here 9 works fine with me. I'm going to press OK. Then after that, select the texture layer, then go to image, then apply image. And over here from the layer panel, I'm going to select the color layer that I created, and the blending options, I will just change this to linear light. And I'm going to select this to subtract, and opacity of 100, scale of 2, offset 120. You can use these settings every time you are working. Seems to work every time. And press OK. Then I'm going to change the blending options of the texture layer from normal to linear light. So what happens is that you basically create 2 layers. So the texture layer contains only the texture information of the image without anything about the color, and the color layer here contains all the color information without any texture. So you typically, when you add the 2, you create the original image that you had before. So I'm going to group these 2 layers that I've created here by just right clicking and select group, or you can just press Ctrl G. Yeah, can't even find this. I think that's why you click it down here, group, or you can just press Ctrl G or Command G on the keyboard to group the layers. I'm going to rename this to frequency separation. I typically like to work with shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, because it speeds up your workflow. And also here, I would like to emphasize that there are a lot of frequency separation actions out there that you can download, and which generates these layers that I have here for you. So to begin with, to start with the frequency separation, I'm going to turn off the texture layer. So I typically like to work with the texture layer turned off, so that I can see, because I'm just going to be blending in the colors with the mixer brush tool. So to select the mixer brush tool, just come here, right click on the brush tool, and select mixer brush tool B. What you can also do, you can just have a shortcut by pressing B on the keyboard, which selects this tool. And because you have a lot of options here, you can alternate between the selections here by just pressing Shift B. So it alternates between all the brush tools that you have here. Once you have the mixer brush tool, you have these panels open here. So typically what I use is I use a wetness of 5%, a load of 75, a mix of 90, flow of 100. How the mixer brush tool actually works is that it just mixes colors wherever you are brushing in. So for instance, just as an example, I'm going to duplicate this layer that I have here. I'm just going to turn this off. And when you go to the color layer and you start brushing in, so with the mixer brush tool selected, you start brushing in from the reds into this part. You see that you pick the reds and bringing it into the models. So that's what we do not want, of course. So this is where you have to be cautious when you're using the mixer brush tool. You have to try as much as possible not to be brushing in from the background into where the model is. And also secondly, with every image you have shadows and you have highlights. So this is where you have to also cautious that you do not brush in from the shadows into the highlights, because the mixer brush tool as a mixer brush will just be mixing the colors that you have here. So if you do this, you see that it really spoils the contouring of the image. So try to avoid this as well. And what I sometimes do is that, for me, for instance, it's easier for me to do horizontal strokes, vertical strokes, than horizontal stroke. So for instance, if I'm working in an area where I have to go horizontally, I just flip the image, and you can do this by pressing R and just click and drag. So this flips the image. When you drag to the right, it flips to the right. If you drag to the left, it flips to the left. And also you can zoom in into the image depending on where you're applying by just pressing Z on the keyboard. Click and drag to the right to zoom in, click and drag to the left to zoom out. And when you're done, just press the R again and just click reset view. So this would reset the view. So let's get straight into the mixer brush tool now. So I'm going to, this was just an illustration, so I'm going to delete this layer that I created here, and I'm going to select I'm going to turn this on back again, select my color layer, select the mixer brush tool here, and I'm going to zoom in into the image. So just click, press Z and drag in to zoom in. And here I'm going to select the mixer brush tool by pressing B. You can press space and click to drag the image left and right as well. So I'm going to select my color layer. I'm going to rotate the image a little bit, zoom out a little bit. I think this is fine. And I'm just going to be brushing in. So just press B to select the mixer brush tool and be brushing. So I'm going to be brushing where I have the shadows now. So I'm going to press B again, and I'll just be brushing in. So just click and drag. Just be brushing like you'll be brushing if you had just a hand brush. So what you have to be careful, like I said, is that you don't have to brush the highlights into the shadows. So I'm taking it very slow. I'm going to be brushing in here. I have just the shadows. I'm brushing in the shadows. Then I'm going to work on this part of her face a little bit. This is fine. And I'm going to go to her forehead. So you can reduce and increase the size of the brush by just the square brackets on the keyboard to increase or reduce the size. So you can see here, for instance, it's not smoothing. So as you brush in, you smoothing out the effect. If you are brushing and you're not seeing the effect, what could happen is that maybe your wetness is low, so you can always increase the wetness to maybe in 50 or whatever would work for you. So, but for me, 5 seems to work very well. So I'm just going to be brushing in. So I typically brush every section of the face. I mean, depending on how much time you have, you can do this as fast as you want, or if you have time, you can go slow. So here, for instance, you can see that this part was dark and I brushed it into the face, and this is bad. So I'm going to undo this by just stepping back on my history. I think this is fine. So I don't have to go here. I just have to brush this section here. If I want to brush this, I just brush this within this area as well. This is fine. And here I'm going to brush this here as well. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush and apply this here. I'm going to increase this a little bit. This is fine. So you can see we're blending in the colors. So wherever that I'm applying the mixer brush tool, or wherever I'm brushing, I'm just blending in the colors there. And normally if the colors looks uniform, that's why you don't see much imperfections, because it's the shadows and the highlights from the skin blemishes that sort of pops out, right? And that's what you see. And the mixer brush tool is very difficult. I mean, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get used to this is for me is one of the best tools when you're doing skin retouching, when combined with the frequency separation. So her face is done here. I'm going to go into her nose area. I'm going to select the mixer brush tool. I'm going to reduce the size because I want to apply only here. So here, for instance, I just reduce the size to here, and I'm going to brush this part as well. And her lips, I mean, I don't leave any stone unturned. I'm just going to brush here as well. And now I think her face is okay. I'm going to go to her hand area. So I'm going to brush here. You can see that I have highlights, so I wouldn't brush from here to here. Of course, I'll brush in only where I have the highlights. And also here is a bit bigger, so I can increase the size of my brush. Now I'll be brushing in. Here's a bit dark, so I have a little free zone to do whatever I want because the whole area is black anyway. So I'm going to reduce the size of the brush, and this is fine. I'm going to zoom out by pressing Z and click into zoom out. I'm going to press R to reset the view, and this is fine. Now let's see what we've done. I'm going to reset the view again, and I'm going to turn on the texture layer here. So let's zoom into the image and see where we were and where we are now. So turn off this. So this is before, this is after, this is before, this is after. This is quite a solid transformation, before and after. So the next thing I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to work on some of the blemishes that I have here. So these tiny spots that I have, I can correct this, of course, with the texture brush and the texture layer I mean, you can, depend on how much time you have, you can decide as to how deep you want to be doing this. But just for educative purposes, I'm going to do just a few minor spots for you to see how this is done. And so select the texture layer, and I'm going to be using the clone stamp tool. To select the clone stamp tool, you can just press S on the keyboard, which selects it, or you can come here and right click and select clone stamp tool. So to use the clone stamp tool, you press Alt, so you select the texture layer, press Alt, select an area where you think is good. For instance, if I want to correct this one here, and I know this area is okay, I just press Alt, pick the area, and I just brush in. Pick area and brush. So typically you pick from an area which is good to replace, and you replace this and where you want to apply this. So I mean, these are tiny spots that it's nothing, I can leave this, but just for you to see how this is done. What happens to me, for instance, when I started retouching, is that when the clone stamp tool was never working for me. It always gives me something that's a mess. And what was happening is that, for instance, from the sample layer, I was not sampling the current layer, but I was sampling all layers. And when you click and you paint, this is what you see. And the problem is just because you are telling Photoshop to clone from all the layers that you have here, but it's not the case. I only want Photoshop to clone from the texture layer. So here, select current layer. Then I'm going to, undo. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit and correct this part of the skin. So press S, click, Alt click, and correct. Alt click. Oops. See, this what is happening here is that I picked the wrong area. So I'm going to click here. This is fine. I'm just going to paint this in. And here I'm going to correct this as well. This is fine. So I can zoom out and let's go back to the forehead. Just take these two here. Correct this, select correct. And also for the hair that I have here, I can correct this as well. I mean, just reduce the size of the brush to something like a hair. Mine is still big, but this works. So just click and paint in just to correct this. So you can also use a soft healing brush to do this. What you just have to do is to come here, right click, and choose spot healing brush tool. So just click and drag, and it tries to correct this. So just drag to where you were, for instance here, just click and paint. So here you don't have to press the Alt to, just click and drag where you want Photoshop to correct, and Photoshop would automatically choose the best, what it thinks is the best replacement here. So this is fine. Just zoom out. I think this is good. And the next thing I'm going to be doing here is like I said, the background wasn't really ironed. I can leave this like this, but just for educative purpose, I'm going to show you how I'm going to correct this part of the background as well. So what I'm going to do now is to try to correct what these lines that I have on the backdrop, because I didn't iron the backdrop before. And I just basically left this as well because I knew I could correct it in Photoshop. And to do this is very easy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click to create a new layer. I'm going to create a visible stamp layer. So then go to image, go to apply image, and click OK. Yeah, so this doesn't work. Of course, it's good that it happened because I want you to know what happened. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to create this again. Click new layer, go to image, go to apply image, because I still had subtract here, which I use in the frequency separation, but that's not what we want. Of course, we want normal. Then click OK. So you see that it creates a visible stamp layer. I can turn off this, so you just see that I have a visible stamp layer of the image. It's also very easy to do this without this long process. You can just press Ctrl Alt Shift E on your keyboard and it creates a visible stamp layer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the subject out of the image by just going to here. I'm going to choose the lasso tool. I'm just going to click and drag. So I'm just going to draw around the image to select the subjects. Go to this part. And this is fine. And I'm just going to tell Photoshop to fill the subject area here with the background. Let's see what Photoshop will do. So right click and choose fill. So select content aware. So content aware means that Photoshop is automatically going to detect what the background is and what the foreground is and try to fill this. So let's click OK and see Photoshop do its magic. Perfect. So you see that Photoshop really filled the background for us. It took out the subject and filled in with the background. So here you can see that I have some issues here, which I can correct very easily. So when Photoshop does this, press Ctrl D, and I'm going to go back to my clone stamp tool. Just press S to go select your clone stamp tool. I'm going to increase the size of the clone stamp tool here, and I'm going to pick a good area and paint this. So here, for instance, I'm going to paint here. Just going to click and paint. But what I'm going to do here afterwards is that this is where I'm going to correct the blemishes that I have here. I'm just going to convert this layer to, so first let me name this to background. And I'm going to right click here and select a smart object. So a smart object means that whatever changes that I have here, I can edit it back again. So I'm going to go to filter, I'm going to go to blur, I'm going to go to Gaussian blur. So I'm going to increase the blur to whatever I want. So for instance, this is fine with me. And I'm going to press OK. So the reason why I changed this to a smart object is, for instance, if I realize that this was too much, I can just double click here and reduce the Gaussian blur to wherever I want. So I'm going to change this back to where it was. So I think with 150-ish, the blur seems to be good enough because I have all these lines from the background gone. I'm going to click OK. And because what happens is that when you have a smart object, the size of the image becomes very huge. So I really do not like to keep smart objects if I do not need them. So to get rid of it, I'm just going to right click here and choose rasterize layer. So it makes this back as a flat object. So now we have to bring our model back in. I'm going to use a trick here, which is also very cool. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn off this layer here, and I'm going to turn off this layer as well, and I'm going to create a new layer and create a visible stamp layer. Like we said, Control Shift Alt E, and I'm going to tell Photoshop to select the subject for me. So like we did before, go to select and go to select subject. So Photoshop would automatically select the subject for me. And now the subject is beautifully selected. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back. So right now I have the selection of the subject. I'm going to come back to my background, turn this on, and click layer mask. So what this will do is that Photoshop would pick the selection that I have here and use it as a layer mask. So let's click layer mask here. I have my layer mask created. Then I'm going to turn off this layer that I have here. And let's explain what's happening here. So what a layer mask actually does is that you have an area of the layer that is selected, and where is white is visible. So you have the visible, whatever layer it is, you see that layer in areas where it's white, and you do not see the layer in areas where it's black. I can make this bigger by pressing Control Alt to get some bigger into this. You can see that this is where, so now I would see the background only where it's white. Of course, this is not what I want. I want it to be the other way around. So to correct this, it's very easy. You can press Command or Control I on your keyboard to flip. So you see that it flips from where it was white to black and where it was black to white, and this is fine. So I'm just going to turn this on, and now you can see that our background is beautifully replaced. So let's look at where we were before. I'm going to turn on back the frequency separation layer. This is before and this is after. We did a very good job replacing the background. So the final stage I'm going to do now is to do some color grading. So just to pop up some of the colors in the image, I can do, first I'll do this by the levels. So just click down here and select levels, and I'm going to increase the contrast by pulling in the whites a little bit and pulling in the blacks a little. So the left side is the blacks, the right side is the white. So I'm going to pull this in a little bit. I think this is fine. This works well for me. And the next thing I'm going to do is to increase some of the color saturation. So I'm just going to come down here, go to vibrance, and I'm going to increase my vibrance. So this is too much. Of course, always go to 100% to see what too much will be like. And I'm going to tone this down. So this sounds fine. And also what I'm going to do, so it's going to, because I have a red background here, I would like to put some reds into the image. And I can do this by just going down here, going to selective color. So with selective color, you target colors singly. So I have all these collection of colors here because I want to target reds, and the skin is basically most of the time red, right? So I'm going to go to the red here, and when you come here, you introduce reds. Cyan, if you come here, you introduce the opposite of cyan. So right now I'm going to pull this in here a little bit because I want to have some reds into the image, and I'm going to play with the magenta a little bit. So go to the extreme, go to the other side. This is fine. I think I'll go to very tiny here, or 1, and the yellows go extreme, go to the extreme. I think I'll pump a little bit of yellows here, so about 4 is fine. And also the blacks, I can bring in some blacks a little bit into the image. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these 2 layers here by pressing Command or Control G, and I'm going to call this color toning. Press enter, and the last thing I'm going to do is to sharpen the image. So to sharpen the image, I'm going to create also a visible stamp layer by pressing Ctrl Alt Shift E. And over here, I'm going to go to filter. So you can also turn this to a smart object if you want, so that you can always correct this. Go to filter, then I'll come to sharpen, and let's use smart sharpen. So I can increase the sharpness here. So you can see what is happening here. This is when I go to extreme. This is too much, of course, but this seems to work fine. So I'll choose about 160. I'll press OK, and the image is sharpened. So let's go through what we've done throughout the whole image. Before that, let me rename this to sharpening. So what we did from the beginning to the end, I'm going to turn off all the layers. So we had this image that we had here. Then we started with a frequency separation to retouch the skin. So I turn on the frequency separation. And the next thing that we did is to correct the background. So I had these lines here which I didn't like. Of course, I wanted to correct this. Then I corrected this using the Gaussian blush tool. And the next thing that I did is the image looked a bit grayed out. So I introduced some color pop and with contrast as well, with the levels and with the vibrance too. I'm going to turn on this. Then you see that we had some skin correction and added some color grading. And the last step is what we did is that's always my last step that I do the sharpening of the image, because once I sharpen the image, it's ready to be exported. So I sharpen the image using Smart Sharpen. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you have any questions, please put this in the comment section and I'll try as much as possible to answer all your questions. If you really want to retouch the image the same image that I retouched here, just leave it your comments down there and I would send you a raw image of this image that I edited here that you can edit alongside with me. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please remember to click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more videos. Thank you.